Today is look at some techniques for creating new wave inspired backgrounds in Photoshop. So the first thing we need to do is obviously open Photoshop. You should see something similar to this. You should see an option for create new. Then we're going to do it A3 sized. If you can't see that on your screen, you need to go to print at the top up here, view all presets, and then you should see an option for A3. I'm going to call it new wave backgrounds. Now obviously name your files. The more you name them, the easier it is to find stuff. I want to make sure that it says 300 here in the resolution box. I'm going to stick it on CMYK because we're going to be printing these designs out at the end of the project. So we can go to create and then you should see this document here. Now if you're familiar with Photoshop, this will all look fairly familiar to you. You've got your tools panel down here, you've got your options bar along the top, and then you've got your additional panels, things like your layers, etc. on the right hand side here. If any of this doesn't look how you want it to, you should see an option just up here where it looks like a little window for essentials. We want it on essentials. If it still doesn't look how you want it to, go to reset essentials, and then you can see it probably does this with mine. Now I'm just going to make that a bit smaller. I don't need these, so I'm going to close those, and there we go. If you've got anything missing that you want, you can edit this bar and things like that, but we'll get into that later. So first thing we want to do is find the stuff that we downloaded to work with. So you'll see I've got a folder here that says New Wave. You should have downloaded all of these resources and popped them in a named folder. We've got a selection of patterns, we've got a selection of images, and we've got some colour schemes. So choose one of these colour schemes and just drag those on. Now you can see it appears like this and it appears blurry. It's only blurry while you're placing it, so you can just tick OK there. So you can click and drag and opt to put something on, or you can go to File, Place Embedded, and select it that way. So I'm actually going to select one of my textures as well while we're looking at it. So find my New Wave folder, and I'm just going to select that one and place that in there. And you'll see it does it the exact same way. The click and drag is probably just quicker. And again, it's a bit blurry and it's just asking me to click up here, so you can either tick there or you can press enter on your keyboard and you're good to go. Now you can see mine has got these sort of boxes around it, which means I can change the size and I can move it around. If yours doesn't look like that and it looks like this, it makes it a lot harder for you to move it and definitely almost impossible for you to size it properly. So if yours looks like this, you need to make sure that you've got this ticked up here. So show transform controls. Always make sure that's ticked when you log on. It just makes your life a lot easier. I'm going to make that nice and big. And I'm just going to pop it in the middle of my page. You can see I've got these pink sort of guides that show up, and that helps me place things. If they aren't showing on yours, you need to go to View, and you need to go to Show and Smart Guides. So View, Show, Smart Guides, and that will help you get those little pink things, and then it means it'll help you just place things in the middle and help you line everything up. Now, at the moment, I don't want to see this, so you can see my layers panel, it's showing me all the different things I've got. So I've got a white background, I've got my colour scheme, and I've got my pattern. And now with this little eye icon, I'm just going to hide that. Now, if I stay on that layer, you can see when I go to that, it auto selects that layer. So whenever you want an object, you need to make sure you've got the layer selected that the object is on. Now I want to colour my background with one of these colours here. So I'm going to use the eyedropper tool. I'm going to select the blue, and then I'm going to go to the paint bucket tool, and I'm going to make a new layer before I fill that. So you can see now I've got a layer that is just my background. Obviously, depending on where I put this layer in the layers panel depends on where it appears. So if it's at the top, it'll be at the top of what I see on my page, and then you can see whatever's underneath it is hidden. If it's at the bottom, then anything that's above it will show. So I'm just going to pop it there, and that's my colour scheme at the top. So nice and easy. When you're sizing things, so say I wanted this was only this big and I wanted to size it to fit my page, you can see mine's nice in proportion, so it stays locked in proportion. If yours is doing this and dragging about like that, that's not what we want. So you need to hold shift to make sure it does that. So it'll either do it automatically like mine is, but if it's dragging about like this, you need to hold shift and then it will let you size it properly. So we always want to keep things nice and in proportion when we're working on Photoshop. Obviously you can see when I hover over those things, my icon changes, and it means I can rotate it so you can get that little curved icon there. Now the first thing we're going to do is draw some shapes. So thinking about our inspiration here, we've got things like this and we've got things like this that are very shape-based, very sort of geometric style. So we're going to start to work with that. So we're going to find our shape tool. So you can see I've got this one here. You've got rectangles and then different options for different shapes here. So I'm going to do a circle first, which is an ellipse. Now you can see again, when I drag that, it doesn't do an equal circle. So if I hold shift, it will do it equally for me. Now at the moment, this is going to be blue. So you can see here it's the same colour as the background. So I want to eyedrop one of these other colours, so my yellow. Go back to my shape tool and you see it selects that shape. And then you can see my yellow has now appeared here as an option. If I don't eyedrop that colour, that yellow won't appear in this panel and won't be an option for us. So now I've got a yellow circle. I'm going to make that a little bit smaller and pop that over there. Now I'm going to make a new layer and then I'm going to do another shape. So I'm just going to do a rectangle. Same thing again, I'm going to pick a colour from my panel with the eyedropper tool. So I'm going to pick the pink this time, go back to my shape tool so that this is selected, and then I'm going to choose the pink. If you don't see this panel when you select it, you can see here it's the properties panel. So if you're on the tool for the thing that you've drawn, so if it's text, you need to be on the text tool. If it's a shape, you need to be on the shape tool. You'll also see they appear here in your options bar as well. So you've got loads of options if you're trying to change the colour of these shapes. So nice and simple. Now we've got two things we're going to do to these that are very sort of like new wave techniques. So we're going to add shadows and glows to these shapes. So double click your layer, so these options are inside your layer, and then you can see I get this window and we've got lots of different things in here. These bottom two are the ones that we want to be working with for now. So I'm going to add an outer glow, so I can tick that, and then when I click it, you see I get these options. Now this is red, so if I go to darken or normal, you'll see that actually it does give it a red glow. If you have it on screen or lighten, it will just make a white glow. So I'm just going to stick with this white glow for now. I'm going to put the noise up here because I want it to be sort of textured. I want it to have like a printy sort of feel, which is very similar to the new wave style. My opacity changes how faint or how clear it is, so I'm going to go sort of about halfway. Now if I do Command minus and or plus, that lets me zoom in and out. So I'm going to zoom in just so I can see it a bit better. Again, I've got the spread here and I've got the size. And you can see that those change what we're doing. Obviously we've got softer and we've got precise. So I'm going to go softer. And you just want to get something that you're happy with. So I'm going to zoom out again and I think I'm happy with that. So there we go. So we've taken the noise up. We've made sure it's on screen. We've played around with the opacity. If you wanted it to be a coloured glow, I could go to my colour, I could eyedrop my pink, and then I could choose one of the other options, so something like multiply or normal, and then you'll see I get a pink glow. I'm just going to Command Z that. And go back to screen because I quite like the white one. There we go. So I can click OK on that now. Now I'm going to go to my other shape, so you can see I've selected my rectangle. Again, double click the layer to bring that panel open, and we're going to add a drop shadow this time. So you can see it's added this shadow effect. Now, same thing, so your opacity makes it darker. Now, this shadow makes it look 3D, so the point of a drop shadow is to make it look like it's coming up and off the page. So the distance makes it look a certain, either far away from the page or really close to the page. So I'm going to go sort of halfway. Again, you've got the spread and the size. And I'm going to take the opacity down. Now, with a drop shadow, it's all about light sources. So it's like, where is the light coming from to create that shadow? So you can change the angle. I tend to go for a trusty 45 degree or 46. And there you go. So now we've got two shapes, one with a drop shadow, one with a glow. Now what we're going to do is we're going to jazz this up even further. So I'm going to show you how to add patterns on top of these. So I'm going to get the pattern that I got earlier. Now I'm going to bring this to the top so that it goes over the top of my layers, and I'm just going to actually make this smaller so that it just covers up the circle. So I just want this pattern over the circle. Now I'm going to take the opacity down on here so that I can actually see my circle underneath it. And I'm going to zoom in. Now if we were doing this to the rectangle, which we will do in a minute, we would use our polygonal lasso tool. Now this gives us a straight line. So you can see if I go around the circle, that's not going to be great. The polygonal lasso tool isn't very good for curved edges. So what I'm actually going to use is the magnetic lasso tool, and that magnetizes to the edge of something. So if you've got high contrast, which we have between the yellow and the blue here, then the magnetic tool will sort of grip to that. And you can see it puts these places in. So if I go like that, it starts to go a bit off-piste and it goes a bit crazy. If it does that, just press backspace and you'll see it starts to delete those points and goes back to normal. Now, if you click at regular intervals, so I'm clicking there, I'm clicking there, clicking again, you can see it just helps it stay on track. Now I've gone a bit off-piste again there, so I'm just going to press backspace and again, and then I'm going to click to sort of remind it of where I want it to be. You don't want to rush with something like this. You shouldn't be going too fast because then it will go all over the place. Nice and simple, and then we join it back up. Now you can see it's given this sort of wiggly line. This is called marching ants, so it looks like they're marching round. That is our selection, so we've created a selection here. So if I go back to my other layer, now I'm using the eye tool just to show and hide it, and you can see I'm on this layer. If I'm on a different layer, it will select out of that layer. So I'm going to go to my pattern, and I'm going to do Command C and Command V, which copies and pastes the selection that I've chosen out of the layer I've chosen to select it from. So nice and simple, we get this pattern. Now I'm going to put that over the top of my circle, which doesn't look amazing at the moment. I'm going to start to play around with these here. So these are layer blend modes, and what this does is, depending on what layer you're on and what setting you choose, it decides how that layer interacts with the things that are underneath it. So I quite like overlay. You can see that sort of blends the pattern onto the circle. Now at the moment, if I move that, they move separately, and you can see it starts to go a bit weird. So I want those two things to be sort of stuck together. So I'm going to hold Shift, I'm going to select my circle underneath, so I've got my two layers selected. I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to link those layers. So that links them together as if they're holding hands, and then they go wherever the other one goes. If I make that one bigger, it makes that one bigger as well, so they're connected together. Now I'm going to do the same thing with another pattern, so I'm going to grab one of my other patterns and do the same for the rectangle. Now obviously the rectangle's a bit easier because we've got straight edges. So same thing again, find my rectangle layer, pop that over the top, change the opacity so I can see what I'm doing. Now this time I'm going to use that polygonal lasso so it gives me straight lines, and just draw to each corner of the rectangle. And same thing again, I just want to make sure I'm on the right layer, make sure my selection is selecting out of the pattern layer, Command C, Command V to copy and paste that selection out of that layer. Now you can see I'm building up layers that I don't need here. To make your life a lot easier, name your layers. So double click the name of the layer. Now this is just named after the screenshot, so I'm just going to name that zigzag. And I'm just going to name that dots. And then I know that those are my original zigzag and dot patterns, so I can come back to them if I want them later. Same thing with this one. I'm going to change my options here, and I'm going to go for something like that one. And hold Shift, select my two layers, right click and link. So that ties those two things together. So now I can rotate those, I can put them on a funky angle, and we've got some shapes. So if I do Command minus to zoom out, those are my two shapes. Now, what I want you to do is experiment and explore, so create different shapes, create different versions, have some with patterns, have some without patterns, have some with glow, have some without a glow. Think about your colours. So for example, I've not used the green here yet, so if I go to the eyedropper and select the green, and then go back to my shape and change it to green, and then I could put a drop shadow on that, or I could put a pattern over that. You might want to play around with putting patterns over your background. So if I drag another one of my patterns in here, so I'm going to go for this one. So if I rotate that to fit the page, make it bigger, like that. Now again, that's covering everything at the moment, so if I start to do one of these, you can see it applies to everything. I don't want that. I want it to look like it's in the background, so I'm going to put it over my background layer. I'm going to move my colour scheme to the top, and I'm just going to hide that for now because I don't need it. Now that's a bit too intense, so again I'm going to play around with these effects on here until I get something that I like. Obviously you can change the opacity if you think it's still too harsh, so for me something like that works nicely. And you can see I'm starting to build up different things that are going on. So explore the different shapes, explore putting those patterns on top, using those selection tools on here to cut those patterns out, using that copy and paste command, getting used to that and seeing how it works, using your eyedropper tool for your colour schemes, and just get familiar with the options that you've got available to you and just start to build up these layers. Now I might add a glow to that so that it stands out. Okay, so we've got a bit of a glow on that. I might add a drop shadow to this one. Double click my layer to open that panel, select the drop shadow, make sure I can see what I'm doing. Pop the drop shadow on there so you can see we're building this up. Now if I wanted to go for a more sort of trippy effect, I could bring another one of my patterns in here. So let's go for this one. Now this is quite trippy already. If you think about, so we're looking at sort of these kind of examples at the moment, which are quite flat. Obviously, if you started to make bigger shapes and smaller shapes and put an outline around them, so if I wanted an outline around, say, this shape here, again, I can do that in this window. So you can see we've got a stroke here, and then that gives it an outline, which I don't quite like that. I might go a bit thicker, and I might go a bit paler. So something like that. So I can start to add outlines around some of my shapes. But if we want to go for something that's more like these, where they've got sort of quite trippy, quite interesting effects going on here, and there's lots of layering going on, so it's less shape-based and more pattern-based. If I go to that pattern that I've just brought in, which is this one here. Now again, name your layers and make it nice and easy. I'm going to distort this, so I'm going to make it look really trippy and really sort of interesting. So I'm going to go up to filter up here. Now make sure you've got the layer selected that you want to do this to, and I'm going to use the liquify panel. We'll just click OK on that, and then we've got two key options in here. So we've got this tool, which warps and drags, and we've got this tool which twirls. So if I show you what the warp does, so that does that. If I show you what the twirl does, that does that. Now you can see the size of my sort of circle here is the size of the brush. So if I take that down, we obviously get a much more reduced sort of effect, or we can get a much bigger effect. Maybe too big. If you're not happy with anything, Command Z will just undo it. So if you don't like what's going on, Command Z until you get back to where you want to be. So if you want to go for something that's quite trippy, quite distorted, you might want to play around with these warp and twirl effects in your liquify panel. So I'm just going to go for something like that. Sort of just distort these edges up a little bit. So something like that. Click OK. Now this tends to take a little while just to load, depending on how much you've done to it, depends on how long it takes to load. Now if you look back at our examples, we've got these sort of distorted effects, and they're sort of like cut out of each other and they're ripped out of each other. So I'm going to show you how to do that, and then they're layered on top of each other. So you could start to combine this a bit like this one here with gradients, with colours, with shapes. So we're going to have a look at how to do that. You might also make your own pattern. So you can see this pattern here was made using sort of polka dots and then distorted and then laid over the top. So we'll have a look at how to do that as well. Now I'm going to rasterize this layer, which will make it a lot easier to work with. And now I can make it fill my page and then double click or press enter to get it to lock in place. Now at the moment it's covering everything, so again I want to put this in my background behind everything else that's going on. I'm going to hide the other background that I've got in there at the moment, and I'm going to again play around with the techniques that I've got. Now if I wanted to take that one step further, if I bring it back up to the top here, I could apply a colour over the top of this. So the way that you do that is you make a new layer. Now I'm going to look at gradients. I could do this with a flat colour, so like we did last time, with your paint bucket tool, you could either eyedrop a colour or you could go down here and change that to a colour, so like that. So if I show you on my new layer that I've made, now always make sure you're working on a new layer. So anything new that you do, whether it's a colour or a shape, or a selection or a copying and pasting, you should have a new layer created. And again, if I go to darken or multiply, you can see that we start to get coloured effects. So if I do that with a gradient, so that's on the same area as your paint bucket by just holding it down. Now up here you can see I've got this box. If I click the box, I get all these options here. So you can see I've got loads of different options. So I'm going to go something like that. Now I can drag that straight, or I can drag that at an angle, and you can see I get these sort of interesting gradients. So I'm going to go for that, I think, and then the same thing again, apply it over the top of the image that I created earlier. So I'm going to go for that. Now if I'm happy with that, I'm going to select both of those and I'm going to merge those layers, and you can see that turns it into one layer and we've got it there. So then I can do the same thing again, take it back to my background and play around with how that overlaps with what's going on there. So you can see I'm starting to get some interesting trippy effects. Now you could put that over shapes, you could get rid of the shapes and just play around with different sort of trippy backgrounds and cutting pieces out and cutting shapes out of them. Totally up to you. There's no right answer here. It's just about you playing around and figuring out what you like the look of and what really captures that sort of new wave aesthetic for you. So key techniques for you to play around with are using the eyedropper tool to create coloured backgrounds, getting familiar with your layers, naming your layers, linking layers so that they sort of sit together and they stay together. So you can see we've got that little link icon. Using that panel when you open up a layer to add outer glows or drop shadows or strokes to your shapes. Getting your patterns on there, using the selection tools to cut out those patterns into different shapes, linking them and using these layer blend modes here to create these interesting effects. Obviously, if you wanted to take that step further, have a go at warping or liquifying one of those patterns and seeing what it does. Remember to merge it down if you're adding a gradient over the top. Use that gradient panel, always do it on a new layer, and just see what kind of fun and interesting backgrounds you can come up with.